Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show, we air from Radio Corcabashkin in Kilkee in County Clare. But we have a wonderful part two and a guest, Martin Moore, who's just published his book, Deeds Not Words, which is about the 16th century Fitzmaurices and historical events of County Kerry. So welcome back, Martin, for part two, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your historical research in Kerry.
Thanks again, Lorna, and appreciate you having me on, and hello again to all your listeners. So my name is Martin Moore. I'm an accountant and local historian based in Tralee. I have an enduring fascination with local history and particularly of the northern baronies of County Kerry. And my focus of attention for a master's degree I did with the University of Limerick some years ago was the Fitzmaurices, Lords of Kerry during the eventful Tudor period, which is the 16th century. So roughly from around 1550, 1603 were my primary years of research.
Fantastic. And this is a real gap in Irish history writing as well, especially when we're looking at the wonderful names like the Fitzmaurices and the Desmond Rebellions and so on. So one of the questions is that we'd like to know, with a question that we need to recap on for last week, which was what was going on in Kerry in the aftermath of the Desmond Rebellions.
Yes, it can take a while for the listeners just to kind of tune into this time. So we're talking about the reign of Queen Elizabeth I in England. And in the year 1588, everyone will remember from their school days about the famous Spanish Armada. Now, there was a kind of a personal element to this as well as being an international event, in that Philip II was then King of Spain. And he'd been previously married to the late Queen Mary, who was a half-sister of Queen Elizabeth. And there was religious overtones to this, and there was military overtones to it, and there was political overtones to it that we won't get into it. But there is an interesting aside that I may just bring your listeners back to last week as well, in that there's a connection between Philip and the Fitzmaurices, in that when the present Lord of Kerry at the time, Thomas Fitzmaurice, came to his inheritance, when he got news of that, he was serving in Milan. And at the time, that same Philip II of Spain was the Duke of Milan. He was the Duke of Milan from the time he was a minor. His father, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, had appointed him as the Duke of Milan. So anyhow, look, we'll get straight on to the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada was an attempt in the year 1588 to invade England with a fleet of over 130 ships. It was the biggest military thing of its time. And along the west coast of Ireland, there are still memories of the Spanish Armada, because as we all know, the Spanish Armada was defeated in the English Channel, and rather than backtrack, what they decided to do, this naval commanders, was to continue around the coast of Scotland, and they started appearing off the west coast of Ireland in September 1588. So all down along from Donegal, Sligo, Mayo, Clare, and on to Kerry, there are stories from those times of the Spanish Armada. And between Thomond and North Kerry at the time, there was ships recorded in the Shannon Estuary. There were ships recorded in Tralee Bay, and famously one of the main ships sank in the Blasket Channels. That was the Santa Maria della Rosa. So the Spanish Armada was big news in 16th century Ireland, particularly along the west coast. And it's estimated that there's thousands of casualties from those times. It was coming into the winter months of 1588. We were in the aftermath of the Desmond Rebellion, when Munster, the whole province of Munster, was devastated from a prolonged warfare that had been going on since 1569. Now, while you're there, a lot of your listeners will be interested in what was the position of present County Clare. Then, as you have said last week, Lorna, it was known as Thomond. And at the time, there was a legal loophole whereby Clare or Thomond was then linked to the province of Munster, of Connacht. It wasn't part of Munster at all at the time. And effectively, someone that committed a crime in Munster would often go to Thomond to evade justice because they weren't answerable to the president of Connacht at the time. So there was very eventful things. So things settled
And it
down
switched
anyway.
over about 2 or 3 times, by the way. So that happened.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
happened from 1569, and it definitely, there's 2 accounts where it moved back from Connacht and up to Thomond, as you say. And I wasn't
Yeah.
aware of the legal loopholes, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
So thank you very much for that, Martin.
that's covered in the book. So anyhow,
Brilliant.
in the aftermath of that, in North Kerry, the Lord of Kerry, the Thomas that had come back from Milan, died in 1590. And under the rules of the time, his eldest son now stood to succeed. But his eldest son, Patrick, was then in Dublin Castle. And in the old annals, it's described that they were in chains with many noble Milesian sons. So he wasn't going to succeed very far while he was detained in Dublin Castle. Now, interestingly, you might...
What had he been detained for?
He was detained as a hostage for the good behaviour of his father. And by right, he should be released. He was noted to be the last of the Munster nobility to be still held in Dublin Castle. So the English people at the time, the Lord Deputy, regarded him as someone that had great influence in Kerry and wanted to try and hang on to him as long as he could. Now, this is a very interesting the insight that you'll get into how contemporary politics worked. So watch this. He was no good to the people of Kerry to have him inside in Limerick jail, as in Dublin Castle, sorry, inside in Dublin. So what he did is there was planters after being brought in to take over the old Desmond land, and planters referred to English settlers that brought over tenants with them, and they were granted extensive lands throughout Munster. And in Castle Island area, the man that came over was a chap called William Herbert. So the Fitzmaurices went to Herbert and asked him to use his influence to get Patrick released, but that had no success. The next thing that they tried was that Patrick would write a petition to the Lord Deputy from Dublin Castle, and that didn't succeed. So then they had a third throw of the dice, and I mentioned last week Grace O'Malley, the famous pirate queen. Well, some of your listeners might remember that she famously sailed to England to meet Queen Elizabeth. But believe it or not, the Lady Fitzmaurice did the same thing. She went before Grace O'Malley to Queen Elizabeth, so maybe she gave the idea to Grace O'Malley to make a direct plea to the crown. And but the Lady Fitzmaurice had no success in getting her husband released from Dublin Castle. So on a final and fourth attempt, the Lord Deputy at the time, who was William Fitzwilliam, was bribed, and that worked. It seems back then that they weren't, bribery wasn't unknown, and Patrick got his freedom through the mechanism of bribing the Lord Deputy of Ireland. We don't know how much, but he was now back in Kerry, so he had to do a bit of rebuilding after the death of his father. So we're coming in then, what happened is an event called the 9 Years' War broke out in Ulster. And the 9 Years' War were led by two very enterprising generals on the Irish side, Red Hugh O'Donnell and Hugh O'Neill. Okay, and we're talking about the years 1594 to 1603. Now, I've got to tell people there that you might be interested to learn that Patrick Fitzmaurice, when he was in Dublin Castle, Red Hugh O'Donnell was in there with him. And some of your listeners might remember how he was trapped as a youth up in that this ship came on to Rathmullen in Donegal, disguised as a merchant ship selling wine. And the young O'Donnell was inveigled aboard on the promise of getting wine, but it was a trap. And he soon found himself in Dublin Castle. So the leader of the 9 Years' War in Ulster, Red Hugh O'Donnell, would have been well known to Patrick Fitzmaurice of Kerry. Notwithstanding this, Patrick saw his loyalty to the crown, so he didn't really want to get involved in this 9 Years' War. He said, let him fight it out above in Ulster.
And just to interject there, it's
Yes.
like the origins of the Shawshank Redemption, of the escape of Red Hugh O'Donnell, because I believe they escaped from Dublin Castle through the garderobe in the castle, ending up getting frostbite on their escape as well and losing a few toes. Now, a garderobe is the chute for the toilet back in the the old days. So so Shawshank Redemption has learned a lot from our Gaelic lords of the O'Donnells and the Fitzmaurices.
Yes, from Tudor times. These are enduring tales, and there's some great stories. I mean, the story of bribery and corruption will go on forever. The making of a plea to the crown is just a novel departure. So there's this book that I have written, These Not Words. It's full of these little
fabulous
stories that are brilliant. Now, just pick up on Retty O'Donnell. Retty O'Donnell actually escaped out of Dublin Castle twice. So it's interesting that he went out, as you said, through the garderobe, but Thomas Fitzmaurice went out through the front gate, haven't
a cleaner way to go, Martin.
Absolutely, I know which way I'd go. Now,
I know which way I'd go as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
In 1598, there was a famous battle in Ireland. They say it was the biggest battle ever fought, and that was called the Battle of the Yellow Ford. And at the Battle of the Yellow Ford, Hugh O'Neill inflicted a huge and significant defeat on the English military forces there. And this turned the political situation of the time upside down. And O'Neill wanted to broaden the battlefield out of Ulster. He knew that he couldn't just keep, as long as he stayed curtailed in Ulster, it would effectively develop into a stalemate. So by getting the Lords of Leinster, Connaught and Munster up in rebellion to resist Tudor rule, then he had a better chance of succeeding. And this brought Patrick Fitzmaurice over to ally with O'Neill and O'Donnell. And this brought the war once again back to Kerry and to the whole of Munster. And this culminated then in the well-known Battle of Kinsale, which we won't really get into at all today, but just by way of, just to kind of put a bookend at the end of our...
Thank you very much. Now, it's not all about battles and politics. Tell us some other stories from your research. What was the economy of the time and the lives of the ordinary people?
Yeah. Well, as you might guess now, I love talking about the military battles, but we have to look at...
you've done very well with them.
Thank you very much. And we'll say, as an accountant, ultimately everything hinges on the economy, and we wouldn't be surprised to learn that it really rested on two fundamental pillar stones. One is agriculture, and two is fishing. And with the money made from that, the people paid their rents to their lords, and the lords then in turn could import wines with the money and pay their taxes and due to the English state. But I found very interesting other angles to the economy in North Kerry, and I found the presence of what was described as, it was listed as the 10 most important mines. So mines for minerals was located in North Kerry at the time. And what was coming out, the mineral that was coming out, was a substance called alum. And alum is very interesting because anyone that's interested in doing family research, I recommend they get onto the folklore sites, the Ducas and the National Schools collection in particular. You can search that, and if you search for alum, you'll find it was quite a versatile substance that was being used in contemporary medicines, and it was also used as a dye in clothing. So this is very important, and we'll say this was situated on the cliffs to the north of Ballybunion, and this was a fascinating sideline to what I found out. Then the like of the stories of the bribery of Lord Deputy Fitzwilliam, the seduction of the jailer's wife in Limerick, are just some of the most interesting stories.
And do we know her name at all, or is she nameless?
Well, we just have the surname, and it's variously described as Shreve, S-H-R-E-I-F, or Sheriff. So we'll call her Mrs. Sheriff for the purpose of this story.
A Shreve, I think, is a sheriff, so that's an unusual aspect.
It is. She was hung anyway with her husband for her trouble. So having had the dubious pleasures of young Patrick and his company until
she lost her life.
He was hung for her troubles.
Oh no!
She had to swing for it. Yes. So I mean, like we'd say, the ordinary people then. The ordinary people suffered horrendously here due to, we'll say, the rents being extracted for them from this incessant warfare, that they were the victims, that they would come along and their houses and property would be burned out, and they must have been heartily sick of this incessant warfare that prevailed in Munster in the second half of the
yeah. And the show has a focus on genealogy. How can someone check out their family genealogy of those times?
Yes, well, as I'm sure you have well covered, really anyone doing genealogical and family research, usually they're lucky to get back to around the 1780s.
That's right.
And before that, really what you want is to try and get references to family names in a district, and it's about as good as you'll get.
Files and books of survey and distribution,
Yes.
down survey, the
Yes,
inquisitions.
so very fast now here is that I'm just looking at one page here that I just have to hand in the book, and it's page 308, and it's a list of people that were pardoned in the 16th century. So this is very interesting to me. So we have Turlough O'Connor Og of Ahana which is now just outside Ballylongford. We have McElligott of Gailey, lots of McElligotts, lots of Stacks. Sively Scanlon is one of the few women that was pardoned at the time. Scanlon would be a good North Kerry name. Then we have a Catherine Nee Breen, which does sound like she has come over from Thomond and happily settled down in North Kerry. Rice, Grady, Carney, Pierce was a great name in North Kerry of the time. So
Is that a surname, Pierce?
Yes, surname Pierce, and spelled Pierce. So I've other names there. There's quite a lot of names. The difficulty, of course, from a genealogical point of view is that when you're doing genealogical research, Lorna, I don't need to be telling you, you work backwards from your present.
That's right.
You just don't pick out these people. But look, there is quite a lot of names out there. Now, a difficulty here is that sometimes they're just used nicknames. So it can be hard to piece them together to see how they're related to different families. But
Absolutely.
I got quite a lot of
and I'd say you got very good at it, because when you write your own book and your own family memoir and your own interest, that's how you get that experiential expertise and knowledge. And there's no other way to get it, only through that way, through genealogy. There's no easy routes. A genealogist professional might cut down the time it would take you, but it still takes that time.
Yeah, but I think what we love to do is ultimately all these people that I've mentioned, the McElligotts, Pierces, Fitzmaurices, Stacks is another great name here in this district. Ultimately, it's not enough to me just to have these list of people, the descendant of this, that this was the son of that fellow and that fellow was the son of and grandson of whatever. I think that will say you have to develop out as to what was going on in the wider region of the time. And hopefully, indeed, it's not words. I have really brought
well, I really think you have done that, and you have focus on the connections with County Clare for our final question, because we just got a couple of minutes left now. So
yes, I'm inclined to ramble on, Lorna. So you
no bother. So just you have one final question: the connections with County Clare, which has become County Clare by the time you're looking at the 1590s and the 1600s.
Yeah, there is significant links between North Kerry and Clare. So the names that are coming up are O'Briens, they're marrying into the Fitzmaurices, as are the McMahons. The McSweeneys are coming in as the Gallowglasses. An interesting family that I could talk a lot about that we just don't have the time for were the McBrodys, that are possibly Brodricks of West Clare. They were a learned family and they were poets. And these are coming up over and over and over again in the story of the Fitzmaurices. Then I had unusual names such as Hare, is coming down from Clare and Thomond to North Kerry. So they're tied up in it. But I think of all of them, and the one that's really got my interest going was the Brodricks, the McBrodys, as they were named at the time. And there was two connections there. One, there was a priest in Listowel Castle when it was besieged in November 1600, Dermot McBrody, and he played a central role in that event. That's told in my book. And then earlier, there was a poet of that family that wrote an extensive elegy to the Fitzmaurices that still has survived, thankfully. So that's
fantastic. Now, listeners, we've been treated royally to a wonderful account by Martin Moore on this excellent publication, and I know Kenneth Nichols will be delighted to add to this when we discuss it as well, because very impressed with the work that's done here. And I'd like to thank you, Martin. Thanks very much for today's
You're
interview. And just to tell our listeners that the shows are podcast out. We will have a show for Christmas and bits and pieces, but we're delighted to have part 1 and part 2 as being Martin Moore's contribution to the 16th century and Deeds Not Words, which can be got from Mahony's booksellers and cost €20. You need to add for postage, a goodbye, a limited print run at the moment, so you do need to purchase quickly because it will run out. And thank you very much, Martin, for your time. Okay.
Thank you, Lorna. Appreciate it. And
appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Bye bye, listeners.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.